You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on. Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud. It's what women are actually talking about on Monday, the 22nd of July. I'm Holly Wainwright.
I'm Mia Freedman.
I'm Jessie Stevens, and my weekend was made by looking at where Outlouders are listening to us.
know.
There were so many Outlouders
Yes.
and Tractors, as you assume.
So many on Tractors. There was a drama in the Outlouders Facebook group because someone posted a photo of themselves in the shower where they have a coffee enema while listening, and that proved to be controversial.
Yes, some people said, don't think it's appropriate. Others thought it was
Very funny.
Very funny.
We had doctors' offices. We had people obviously cooking and folding, washing and all those boring things that people don't like doing. But so many regional Outlouders.
And so many around the world. That was really exciting too. So please keep tagging us on the Mamamia Out Loud Instagram page. We are loving watching. And look, we've got a few that we really, really like, and we'll be sending out signed copies to the winner.
Those lucky people.
Those lucky people. Signed copies of our books to the winners.
On the show today, it's been a quiet few days in US election news. Not really, just kidding.
At least we got a weekend.
I know, we did get a weekend.
Yeah.
And then Joe Biden very thoughtfully announced that he was stepping down just at the perfect time for us to be able to circle our American politics wagons and bring you what's next.
And of course, Mia is writing her thank you note to Jill Biden, to all the Outlouders who are wondering. I'm sure we'll get into that.
Also, the workplace mistake that ruined an awful lot of Friday afternoons. And yes, we are living in a world where a repentant movie star has just given a high-profile interview to deny being a cannibal. Welcome to the comeback of Armie Hammer. But first, Mia Freedman.
My favourite story from the weekend, in case you missed it, is that a Dubai princess has declared her divorce on Instagram. Married just over a year ago, Sheikha Mara posted on Instagram, "Dear husband, as you are occupied with other companions, I hereby declare our divorce. I divorce you, and I divorce you. Take care, your ex-wife." The only thing that could have made it better is if it was on the Notes app. Who is this queen, you ask? She's 30 years old. She's the daughter and one of the 26 children of Sheikh Mohammed, who is the Prime Minister and Vice President of the United Arab Emirates. So the reason she said, I divorce you, and I divorce you, there was a story on Mamamia that unpacked this story, which we'll link to in the show notes. But it refers to a tradition that's not widely practiced. It's called talaq, and in some Muslim communities, it refers to the right of a man to divorce his wife, and he can do it either verbally or in writing by just saying, I divorce you 3 times. Now, it doesn't go the other way. Women can't divorce their husbands by this same sort of ancient tradition. So it was more symbolic than anything else. But I looked a little bit further into this very interesting woman. She got married a year ago to this dude, and she gave birth to their first child 10 weeks ago.
And did you see the caption on that image of the child? I went back because I need to look at the Instagram activity.
Well, I went back to make sure first, of course, that it was her legitimate account. Mm-hmm. It is on her account that she posted that. She has almost 900,000 followers. And there are no photos of him because they've each deleted all the photos of each other, including of their lavish wedding, from their respective Instagram accounts.
Classic breakup. They've unfollowed each other. That's when you know it's done.
Yeah.
And she wrote, this was about 6 weeks ago with the baby, she just wrote, just the two of us. Which might
6 weeks ago.
Yeah, which might have looked, out of context, just like a sweet little picture with the newborn. But now it's very loaded. Yes.
I wanted to know more about the husband, or the ex-husband, as he will soon be. His name's Sheikh Mana Al Maktoum, and he's widely known for his involvement in various successful ventures. He has made a name for himself as a successful entrepreneur and passionate traveller, among other things, it would seem.
This is an ABC News special report.
Good afternoon. I'm Rachel Scott at ABC headquarters here in New York. We are coming on the air at this hour with breaking news. President Biden has just announced that he is ending his re-election bid.
Biden wrote, quote, that it has been the greatest honor of my life to serve as your president, and while it has been my intention to seek re-election, I believe it is in the best interest of my party and the country for me to stand down and to focus solely on fulfilling my duties as president for the remainder of my term.
The only thing hotter than the temperature here in the United States right now is the heat of the conversation about what's been happening. We've used the word unprecedented so many times, but we really are in unprecedented territory here with this.
On Saturday afternoon, Joe Biden called Steve Ricchetti, one of his closest advisors, and told him that he needed to come to the Biden holiday house straight away and bring with him Chief Strategist Mike Donilon. The reason Biden's at the family beach house and not at work in the White House is that he's sick with COVID. And you might have seen that last week. His staff went straight there, wearing their masks and giving the President of the United States a wide berth, and they began to game plan out what was broadly inevitable, but until Sunday afternoon US time, certainly not a done deal. Biden, under immense pressure from his party, his country, and yes, us here at Mamamia Out Loud, we're very influential, the Biden family, as I'm sure you know.
Was Jill pressuring him? Maybe, maybe not.
Was stepping down as the presidential candidate for 2024. It was not going to be 81-year-old him taking on Trump in November. The New York Times reports that on Sunday morning, he called 3 people, Vice President Kamala Harris, his White House Chief of Staff, and his campaign chairwoman, and told them, but they didn't tell anyone else on his staff until 1 minute before he made the announcement to the world on social media on Sunday. He got on a Zoom call. That's like when your boss tells you to get on a Zoom call on Sunday morning, you're like, He got on a Zoom call with the rest of his staff, and he read them in his raspy COVID-affected voice, his letter of resignation. He thanked them for their service, and then he pushed go on posting the letter to social media. And then he said to his team, apparently, come to me with the work and let's get it done. He posted at 1:46 p.m. The reaction was swift. A surprise but not a shock is how some described it, referring more to the timing and the manner of it than the announcement itself, which everybody's been kind of hoping was going to come for a while. And the Democrats immediately rolled out their Joe is a hero, what a wonderful president, what a selfless act this has been, tributes. And Trump's Republicans immediately went on the attack, questioning who is and who has been running the country, calling for Biden's immediate resignation as president, and pointing hard at the perceived deception of the Democrats for keeping Biden's condition secret for so long. Donald Trump said, bless him, he's always so reasonable, isn't he?
I bet he just said, I wish you well, old mate.
Yeah, I hope you recover swiftly.
Guess what? Did he say that?
No.
Crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president. He's certainly not fit to serve, and he never was, ! He only attained the position of president by lies, fake news in capital letters, and by not leaving his basement. All those around him...
That was a new one.
I know. All those around him, including his doctor and the media, knew that he wasn't capable of being president, and he wasn't. And now, look what he's done to our country, with millions of people coming across our border, totally unchecked and unvetted, many from prisons, mental institutions, and record numbers of terrorists. Wow. We will suffer greatly because of his president, but we will remedy the damage he has done very quickly. Make America great again. Mia, Jessie, what were your feelings on waking up to this news?
I was relieved, of course. I was also quite surprised because it had become this incredible stalemate. And I was getting, as many Democrats were, not that I'm a Democrat, I live in a different country, but I was getting more and more incensed that an entire party and indeed potentially an entire democratic system was being held hostage by this man who was said to be stubborn and digging in and angry that people were betraying him. And it's like, dude, it's not about you.
I thought the whole democratic system was being held hostage by his wife, Jill.
Well, that's true, because I think if Jill had said, I'm so glad you pointed that out, Jessie, because if Jill had said, Joe, it's time to go. Stop it. Joe would have been listening. But if Jill had said
3 weeks ago.
A year ago when he decided he was going to run, Joe, sweetie, no, then we wouldn't be here.
So the argument that we've been having for weeks is whether or not Jill actually had any power in that. I mean, now that he has stepped down, are we going to give her a little bit of credit that perhaps Jill has actually been in his ear all along? They've been in the holiday house. They've been having maybe some chats, maybe some walks along the beach, maybe some bedside conversations.
She posted a love heart emoji. You know the double love hearts?
Yep.
And the sound you can hear also is Donald Trump frantically Googling what rhymes with Kamala.
That brings us to what's next. Over the past few weeks since that fateful debate, it's been widely said that there were two options for the Dems to replace Biden. Either Biden anoints Harris, making her a pretty sure shoo-in for the nomination going into the convention in 3 weeks' time, similar to how we've just seen Trump, right, at the Republican convention being like chosen, even though obviously he was chosen a long time ago. Or the idea was a few candidates emerge and they run into the convention with like open debates and sort of campaigning, and then at the convention they pick someone, which is apparently how it used to be done in the olden days but hasn't been for ages. It very much looks like the former is happening. And although he didn't do it instantly, he did keep Kamala hanging for half an hour. Biden has endorsed her as his pick for the nominee. She, of course, is the vice president. And although she's been publicly backing Biden in the last few weeks, she has also been conspicuously visible and giving some pretty good speeches in a way that the president is certainly not able to do at the minute. Here she is a few days ago talking about the Republican convention and its claims to be the party of unity.
You cannot claim you stand for unity if you are intent on taking reproductive freedoms from the people of America and the women of America. Trying to ban abortion nationwide as they do and restrict access to IVF and contraception as their plan calls for.
She responded to the announcement that Joe Biden was stepping aside by posting, "On behalf of the American people, I thank Joe Biden for his extraordinary leadership as President of the United States. I'm honoured to have the President's endorsement, and my intention is to earn and win this nomination. I will do everything in my power to unite the Democratic Party and unite our nation to defeat Donald Trump and his extreme Project 2025 agenda." If you're with me, add a donation right now at my link in bio. Few things about that. First of all, the money's going to start coming back again. The donation tap will be turned on. Pretty much everybody, every major and minor donor in the Democratic Party had switched the tap off.
I read, and tell me if this is true or not, that if he endorses Kamala Harris, then the donations can go to her. But if it's a completely different nominee, then they have to raise money themselves.
If it's a completely different nominee, the money goes back to the party.
Yeah,
and then
it's complicated.
It can get to the nominee in a new way.
Yeah.
But because the money was donated to Biden-Harris, it's Kamala's money.
So there's about $150 million in an account. The Republicans are going to try and block that easy transition. They're already working to make that happen. In that grab and her statement, the two things that are interesting, instead of Joe Biden, who's only been able to talk about his own mental acuity over the last little while, she named two things that are really, really strong points of vulnerability for Trump and the Republican Party. The first is women's reproductive rights and abortion, which Joe Biden has really not been able to articulate at all. And the second is Project 2025. Hol, can you explain what that is?
Yes, so it was very clever of Harris to mention that straight off the bat in her first post, because if you have not heard of Project 2025, turn to your teenager in your life and ask them about it, right? Because it is a story that's now blown up into the mainstream, but has been bubbling away in places like TikTok for ages. My 14-year-old knows about Project 2025. What it actually is, and the ABC's Four Corners are doing a great two-parter on Trump that goes into this. I talked about it a bit on Friday. But it's basically this plan that a sort of cohort of quite right, as in right-leaning Republicans, mostly MAGA people, have been working on putting in place that in theory means that when if Donald Trump gets elected president, on day one, he can go into lots of organizations within the government. Because remember, to get anything done in any government takes a long time. You've got all the levels of civil service you've got to get through. The idea is having right-leaning, sympathetic Trump conservatives ready to go in all those institutions, turfing out the people who are there. J.D. Vance has said he wants to fire all the mid-level bureaucrats in America on day one of Trump presidency to get the Trump sympathists in there. And then the idea is they can go hard on enacting things they really want to do, like a nationwide abortion ban. And as Harris mentioned in that speech, it's not just about abortion. It's also even about contraception, IVF.
They want to ban all
coming
of those things.
after same-sex marriage, marriage equality, lifting lots of restrictions on where you can drill for oil, lots of very
Mass
conservative things.
of immigrants.
That sounds like tyranny.
To be honest and even-handed about this, Trump has begun to distance himself a bit from the Project 2025 thing. And so there are little bits of debate about how legit it really is, but it's definitely happening. The ABC's documentary got a lot of people on the record and have a copy of the whole documentation.
You watch, the first thing he will do is change that you can only be president for 2 terms.
You say that like he's a shoo-in, and I am feeling optimistic.
Oh, yeah, I am
sure.
I'm feeling relieved.
So let me do a tiny bit about Kamala, and then we can go to how excited we are or are not about this now. So if you just need a very quick reminder on who Harris is, she's 59, which is so young in comparison.
She is a baby.
She's a Gen Xer. She is a politician from California who has a really long legal career. So she was the DA for San Francisco. She was the Attorney General for California. So she's a prosecutor, right, which is why she's very good at arguing. She's married to fellow lawyer Doug Emhoff. She has 2 adult stepchildren with him, and she famously said they call her Mamala. When she was sworn in, she was the first woman, obviously VP, the first Black American and the first Indian American to take the role. The people who love her say she's great because she knows how to get shit done, that she's progressive but tough on crime, and with her legal history, she has the chops to be aggressive in her opposition to him. She's young, she's energetic, and she could run for 2 terms. The people who are not so keen say that she has disappointed in the VP role, that she's not very good off the cuff, and she's not what they call a performance politician, which can be a problem when you're up against a man who is all performance, which is what Donald Trump is. So, Mia and Jessie, are we excited, and are we excited about Harris?
I'm excited, and I think that this is a case. I remember thinking this about Joe Biden a while back, that it was a man who met his moment, and I think that this has the potential to be a candidate who's met her moment, because she is a prosecutor who is up against a convicted felon. There's a really easy campaign line. She's hard on crime, and she always has been. That's part of her history. So she's a Democrat who's hard on crime, which will appeal to a certain centrist Republican. And with even what Trump said about immigration and crime and terrorism and blah, blah, whether or not that's true, Kamala actually has the history and the qualifications to say, I know how to fix this. I think Kamala at her absolute best, I've been listening to clips from her exchanges with Brett Kavanaugh. When she is in her element, she is very, very good. And I've heard analysts who are a lot smarter than me say she's great at the specific. She's really good on a point. She's really good at legislation. She's really good at pressing something. What she's not great at, and when people say she's not a great performance politician, she's not necessarily someone who can stand on stage and deliver this rousing, exciting, broad strokes speech about the future. That's not something they've seen from her.
Like Obama.
Yeah, and she's not
unfortunately
particularly
like Trump.
Yeah, and she's not particularly interested in a personal narrative. So there's this great profile that was written, I think, in the New Yorker about her a few years back. She said, I don't feel comfortable talking about myself. That's not what she finds interesting.
This is also in rather stark contrast to somebody else.
So she's great when she has a job to do, but I also heard someone say, who's a longtime advisor of hers, one thing that drives her crazy is getting reduced to a demographic stereotype. It is going to be enormously symbolic to have a candidate up who's the first female woman of colour who's potentially president of the United States. To her, I don't think that's going to be the most interesting thing. She's very much like, I deserve this, I'm qualified for this, and I have a lot of work to do.
I don't know if she says I deserve this, but I think it was important that she said, I want to earn this nomination.
What do you think that means?
It means that she's not accepting it as a lait d'amour. She's not accepting it as a foregone conclusion. She knows, because it's true, she does have to work. And currently, reports are that she's, of course, working the phones. She's already got the endorsement of the Clintons, of Pete Buttigieg, of Gavin Newsom, who is another both of them were considered to be front runners if it was going to be an open convention.
The convention, this is where I could see things going really wrong, right? Is if this breaks into all-out chaos and then you have a whole lot of nominees come forward and go, I want it, then what can happen is that you get this infighting. We've seen this in Australia a little bit. But then you've got a lack of unity, a lack of narrative. The Republicans jump on that. Do you see a world in which that happens?
I did before, but I don't now, because I think that all the senior Democrats are working behind the scenes, and they were working behind the scenes to engineer Biden to step aside without publicly humiliating him and holding a press conference. And now they will work on what's the best thing for the party at this point. Because what you describe is the American political system, but usually it happens like 2 years before an election. Yeah. And I actually think even though this is highly unusual and unprecedented, et cetera, and it seemed like the Republican convention last week, in contrast, was like almost a victory rally 4 months too soon. So if they've got a vulnerability, it's that they've peaked too early. Here's what I think is going to happen from here. And here's where I think her strengths and her weaknesses. The most important thing, remember, is getting people interested enough to go out and vote. Now, again, I don't vote, but a lot of people were feeling completely despondent. I've got to choose between Joe Biden and Donald Trump. I'm not excited about that. Now, suddenly, women have a reason to get out. African Americans, some of whom, of course, are responsive to Trump, who's trying to say he's the unity candidate, they are likely to be more engaged. But what's going to be interesting, all you needed to know is that the Trump campaign really wanted Joe Biden to stay. They were just hoping that he was going to stay, because this makes things different. What I think this is going to expose, and what I think we all have to be ready for in the next few months, is that it is going to get incredibly ugly.
Yeah.
Because when he feels challenged, Donald Trump will go at her race and he will go at her gender. It will go back to that awfulness of when he was running against Hillary, which we didn't see as much when he was running against Joe Biden, because he was going up against another white man. So he doesn't automatically reach for the most disgusting form of abuse.
Well, already we're seeing the seeds of questioning about her heritage. So because both of her parents weren't born in the US, one was born in Jamaica and one was born in India, remember the Obama thing? About him not being
Birthers.
The birthers, exactly.
Yeah, it's like the equivalent of but her emails. What is also going to be interesting internally is that because she's a candidate of colour, what's little known about J.D. Vance is that his wife is the daughter of Indian immigrants. So once he starts persecuting Kamala Harris based on her race and her Indian heritage, which he will, surely that's going to make for some slightly awkward conversations around the Vance dinner table, because his children are the grandchildren of Indian immigrants.
Yeah, but Vance is pretty nationalistic himself, right? And he's all about heroing the white working class, so he plays that low. There's a dog whistle we have to listen out for. I mean, there's so many potential dog whistles around Harris, but when people say she's not a performance politician, think about women in politics. The same thing was said about Clinton, the same thing was said about Julia Gillard, is they're like head girls. Like they work really hard because they've had to work really effing hard, much harder than lots of blokes who would have waltzed into the kind of high-profile, jobs that they've done, that they're often kind of criticised for being too studious, serious, good at policy, good at detail, good at getting shit done. And often that gets criticised as being like, they're not very good, they're not really inspiring, are they? They're not really good orators, they're not orators, they're not really very great at performing like a Trump, who can't organise a piss up in a brewery but is really good on a stage full of rabid enthusiasts. So I think you want to watch for some of that kind of unspoken sexism that even comes from within the Democrats around Harris. Is like, oh, she's a bit boring. It's like she would say she's a bit boring because she's been getting a lot of shit done, and that, the press don't want to come and see her at like town hall meetings in, Michigan or whatever, working on actual projects that help people. So it's going to be really interesting to see what they do about the razzle-dazzle effect. But yeah, I think it's suddenly got a lot more interesting. Democrats have got the narrative back.
Remember also, when you're vice president, you're not allowed to shine.
Yeah.
You're not allowed to outshine the president. Everything I know about US politics, vice presidents I know from Veep, of course, and that's the ongoing gag, that you've got to be good, but you can't be better than the president. And you've had a president who's been pretty much invisible for the last 4 years. So she has had to play it down. And as we've discussed many times, what makes you good at being elected is not necessarily what makes you good at running a country. So Donald Trump is very good at being elected, but I think things just got a whole lot more interesting. You're right.
This is a fast-evolving story, as we saw this morning. To keep across the latest headlines, listen to our twice-daily news podcast, The Quickie. We're going to pop a link in the show notes. Tomorrow's deep dive is all about what will happen next, so tune in.
Listen, people can debate on style points, but ultimately this election and who is the president of the United States has to be about substance.
Mamamia out loud!
For many people, Friday afternoon was ruined thanks to one workplace mistake by someone, we don't know who it was.
I'd love to know who it was.
I think that their performance review probably won't be great this year. As a result of a malfunction in some software made by a company called CrowdStrike, Airports, banks, media organisations, supermarkets, retailers, and many outlouders were among the organisations and individuals whose lives were disrupted thanks to Microsoft's global outage. Now, you may have heard, was it Microsoft? Was it CrowdStrike? What happened is that there was a faulty software update that was sent to many computers and devices around the world. Pretty standard. Software updates happen all the time. I just did one this morning. And it was provided by the cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike. And this update forced Windows-based computers to basically crash and show what we all know as the blue screen of death. Here is CrowdStrike CEO George Kurtz.
That update had a software bug in it and caused an issue with the Microsoft operating system. And we identified this very quickly and remediated the issue. And as systems come back online, as they're rebooted, they're coming up and they're working. And now we are working with each and every customer to make sure that we can bring them back online. That was the extent of the issue in terms of a bug that was related to our update.
As we said, that was the CrowdStrike CEO, George Kurtz, but the president of that company is actually a Melbourne man called Michael Santonis. It's been said that this incident is the largest IT outage in history. Microsoft estimated that 8.5 million individual devices were hit by the outage, and some of the ways in which it impacted big and small. Triple J presenters were forced to manually play the news theme to air by holding up a phone to the microphone.
Oh, bless.
I love this. It's like needs must. People found ways to get shit done.
Yeah.
Channel 10's The Project wasn't even sure if it would make it to air.
What am I saying? Oh, this is what happens when the systems go down. Just weird text sort of appears on the... Can we get a shot of a camera so you can see how the auto cue works?
Come and attack me like
that.
You're so right.
Yeah.
We've just
so what's happened is I started reading it and then the thing just told me to go back to the start and read it again.
That's right.
So there you go. Anyway.
Supermarkets were accepting cash-only sales with EFTPOS down, and a lot of people, even over the weekend, could not pay with anything other than cash at supermarkets. Remember cash? Airports, of course, were in complete chaos. Some airlines were unaffected, but many were. And some of these airlines had to actually write people's boarding passes. Like, I don't know, here's a Post-it note that says you can get on the plane.
Oh, my gosh.
There were more serious ones in that people couldn't pay for petrol, which just meant they were kind of stuck. Police and fire systems in Australia were affected, as well as 911 lines in the US. A lot of flights had to ground in the US as well. And in Britain, some doctors couldn't access the NHS systems. So it got very close to seriously affecting people's lives. It didn't. And that's what I think that there was a moment. There's this movie called Leave the World Behind, which I watched over the break, which has Julia Roberts in it. Weird movie. Really enjoyed it.
Bit sci-fi.
Bit sci-fi. Bit
Produced
this.
by the Obamas, you know.
Little
Fun fact.
It was a little bit this. And that's what I think we all wondered when we first saw it. It was like, a plane's going to fall out of the air?
Yes.
Like, I don't know. And this is the thing. You just explained that. And I would like to interrogate how much of it you actually understand. Because I've read a lot about this.
None.
I don't understand what the grid is, where it is, what button went wrong.
No,
what
I do understand. So this is like a component part.
Yeah.
So you made a meal. And the provider of the salt went, we've had a problem at the factory. That salt's actually bad. Everyone that used that salt to make their meal and have it in their pantry has a bad meal and gets food poisoning.
And here's the problem with the salt, right? Which is what a bunch of experts have come out and said. We have become so centralised that it is a tiny portion of people who now own and operate, I'm going to say all the world's internet. I'm not sure if that's right, but
certainly all the salt.
All the salt, right? So all the salt is owned by the same people. So then when we go, there's an issue with the salt, it's not affecting 2% of the population, it's affecting everyone.
Because salt's in everything.
Because salt's in everything.
This metaphor.
Salt is in everything. And
Salt's
nothing's good without salt.
And sometimes you don't know what salt's in. So like we were like at Mamamia, we were like, is our whole system down? Is Mamamia gone? We didn't use salt, so we were okay.
This is the thing about this, and your point is absolutely right, Jessie, is whenever these kind of big outages happen or a big crash happens, we're all reminded how reliant we are, obviously, on digital everything, and that for a minute freaks us out, and then we just go back to it because, like, that's the world now.
Because TikTok has new videos.
Yeah, exactly. But also, we're all entirely reliant on something that we don't understand even a little bit. So you kind of go, oh, well, that was unfortunate. Salt and move on.
Yeah.
Right?
And the idea that we are one button push away from utter and total chaos is something that tech experts have now said, all right, so this was an ominous look at what might happen if this was done on purpose. And we've heard a lot about cyber attacks, and obviously there's been a bunch that have happened in the last year or so.
And the good news is that this wasn't that.
And this wasn't a cyber attack. This was just human
terrorism.
error.
Yeah.
But I saw the ABC wrote, this serves as a dress rehearsal for more sinister possibilities. For example, I was reading about natural disasters and solar storms. I don't know what a solar storm is, but something about satellites. I don't know where the satellites are. I think they're in the space. But if you go to space and destroy a satellite, then you could get portions of the world completely off the grid in an instant.
This is
Jessie
scary.
Stevens,
I don't like it.
you need to stop giving the bad people ideas. This is one of the things that's been really interesting coming off the back of this conversation. So for a lot of people, it was just a bad day, right? I got a little glimpse into this in that I was having a little mini break with my family at the end of last week. It was lovely. And on Friday, we went to check into a hotel we were staying at in Coogee in Sydney. And obviously all the systems were down, so they couldn't check us in. And they're just like, at first they had no idea. So they're like, do you want to just sit in the lobby and wait a few minutes? I'm sure it's all going to come back on.
Well, I call the manager of the internet.
Exactly. And then, it became apparent 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half whatever. And so they worked around it. But the thing is watching the staff, who are all on this hotel desk in Sydney, like managing everybody who was whinging and trying to talk to each other about like, is yours back up yet? I've still got the
they don't know what the system is.
Of course they don't. And nobody does. And so to all the outlouders who were working and having to deal with the front-facing consumers who were all going, I just want to blog, get on my plane, do whatever. I mean, that was a lot. But on the other serious side of it, to what you were just saying, Jessie, I've heard some commentary about how because we then cover these outages in a lot of detail and the media amplifies it, some people are like, shush a little bit because you are making it really clear just how vulnerable we are and how copycat basically attacks
It's a how-to guide.
Because it wasn't an attack, as we've said, so we don't all need to freak out about that. I mean, I would imagine that the kind of people who could bring it down are probably pretty much aware of this already.
I think they're across
assuming that they are and they're not, and they're just scrolling through TikTok and then they're going, oh, glitch,
I think it's
see.
because they heard us talk about it on Out Loud.
They just learned what
I never thought of doing that.
They just learned what CrowdStrike is.
Whereas
and they're like, I'll get them.
That the kind of security clearance you needed to get access to anything that could take down the world or whatever, launch missiles, used to be a very seriously guarded thing. And now we're just like, set a virus loose on me as salt. And before you know
just
it,
pull the plug out.
The world's on its knees.
Pull the plug out and I don't know where my money is.
Well, the money thing's
operate.
interesting because we experienced the Optus shutdown a little while ago. We got over that pretty quickly. But this idea of cash and how reliant we are, the only reason I have cash, and I happen to have cash on Friday, is because my alterationist only takes cash. And that is literally the only time I ever have cash is when I have to go and pick up something from the alterationist. And so I did have cash because we were going out to dinner on Friday night and I was like,
pay?
I was like, I'm going to have to pay for everyone.
Oh, and they won't even be able to transfer.
They won't even, But I thought maybe we won't even be able to go. Maybe the restaurant will be closed. It wasn't, and everyone paid with card except for me. I paid with cash. And everyone's like, why do you have cash?
She's a prepper.
But doesn't it make you think, it's making me a bit preppy, where I'm going to be like, I think maybe a bit of cash.
Under the mattress?
No, anyone who's listening, I will not be having cash at home. I will be keeping it somewhere secret that's not at home.
You know it all?
Or on my person.
Yeah, that's what you'll have on your front door. Cash not kept on premises.
No, but I just think maybe in theory it would be good for some people to get some cash and have them in some places.
It felt a bit Y2K.
It did.
It did a little bit.
And that didn't happen
You
because
old enough to remember Y2K?
I do. I was terrified because I was 10 and 10-year-olds were really across Y2K. I had a lot of brain space to take up and go, oh my God, everything's going to fall from the sky when it turns into 2000. Yeah. But we had a Y2K moment, and I just think it's a reminder that we're all plugged into something none of us understand. We can't operate without it.
Do you want daily Out Loud access? Why wouldn't you? We drop episodes every Tuesday and Thursday exclusively for Mamamia subscribers. Follow the link in the show notes to get us in your ears 5 days a week. And a huge thank you if you're already a subscriber.
A new documentary, A Piers Morgan interview, and how a cancellation saved a life. Armie Hammer is back and is debating the semantics of the word cannibal. Before we get into it, if that word or anything in that domain might not be appropriate listening right now.
What, if you're triggered by the word cannibal?
No, maybe you're just in the workplace, you're listening to it out loud and you don't want to hear the graphic details of someone's text messages from
but to be clear, he didn't actually eat anyone.
No, but the words are pretty confronting.
Holly thinks maybe he did.
Some of the words are pretty confronting, so I'm giving you a heads up.
Are you a cannibal?
No. You know what you have to do to be a cannibal? You have to have actually eaten someone.
Have you ever eaten any human flesh?
No.
What do you feel that a large swathe of the public just think Armie Hammer is a cannibal?
If you believe that, I have a bridge to sell you. Yeah.
But the reason they would believe it is because you said it.
Sure.
I'm 100% a cannibal.
And I think a lot of these things, these text messages, so it's this. This was a very intense affair, very sexually charged between two people with very similar proclivities and kinks. And any of those conversations that we had inside of that relationship, when you take them outside of that context and put them into broad daylight, doesn't look so good.
Today, we want to talk about the Piers Morgan interview that broadcast on YouTube on Friday, which is Hammer's first televised interview in 3 years. Armie Hammer is 37 years old, and in 2021, multiple women came forward claiming the actor, who you might know from The Social Network.
He played the Winklevoss twins.
Yes, he did. And he was
That's the only thing I know him from.
Call Me By Your Name, one of the best movies ever. These women claimed that he had abused them. It began when a woman started leaking Instagram direct messages sent from a man she said was Armie Hammer. Some of the messages read, "I am 100% a cannibal. I want to eat you. I need your blood. I crave it." He expressed rape fantasies. He said he wanted women to be his slaves. He told another woman he had a desire to cook and eat one of her ribs. The text messages are extensive and confronting. One woman claimed she had been in a relationship with Hammer and he subjected her to emotional abuse. Another said he had branded her. She had a photo of it, left her covered in bruises and talked about consuming her. There was also an allegation of rape by a woman named Effie. This became the basis for the LAPD sexual assault investigation into Hammer, which was ultimately dropped due to insufficient evidence. So, on Friday, Hammer sits down with Morgan. Here are the headlines. Obviously, what you heard is significant about whether or not he thinks he's a cannibal. That is a no from him. He spent the first...
I do think he has a point. If you don't actually eat a person, are you a cannibal?
And I suppose that was, at the time, when a celebrity says that, that's the headline, but it was the way in for a much larger story.
Yeah, true.
He spent the first 10 minutes or so of the interview talking about his mental health, the impact of fame and success on his life, and how addiction made him behave in ways he's not proud of. He acknowledges that Robert Downey Jr. helped him but didn't pay for his rehab, as was reported. And there was also this, which he said about his friendships.
People are sending me private emails saying, I know this isn't you. Like, this is crazy. Who, this guy, like, I've known you for years. This guy who they're talking about, like, it's just not you. And I was like, why are you sending me emails? Say something about this. Like, why is everyone saying to me directly, like, we know this isn't real. Say it publicly. Like, help me. And Clark looked at me and he said, you know, what kind of friend are you? You set your house on fire and your house is burning to the ground. And now what? You want your friends to run into a burning house with you? What happens to your friends when they run into a burning house? And I said, they would get burned. He said, do you want your friends to get burned? And I said, no. He said, if you were a good friend, what would you want for your friends? And I said, I would want my friends to stay as far away from the fire as possible.
It's also worth noting that this appearance follows two other appearances on podcasts. One where he said, there were things that people were saying about me that just felt so outlandish that I was a cannibal, he said during our podcast appearance. Now I'm able to sort of look at it with a sense of distance and perspective and be like, that's hilarious. People called me a cannibal and everyone believed them. Is this it? Is this the moment?
What it is. I have issues with this way he's presenting this whole thing.
Is this the moment that Armie Hammer comes back?
Well, I think he's going to be on Celebrity SAS without a shadow of a doubt and possibly Dancing with the Stars.
I really doubt it. I want to know, Mia, as our expert strategist, why Piers Morgan? Because it's not exactly the most credible. Like, it's one of the biggest. It's definitely one of the biggest places, but Piers Morgan will give a mic to anyone. Famously recently, the woman who was alleged to have been the baby reindeer stalker.
Last month, he did Kevin Spacey.
Yes. It's like a lot of possibly more mainstream media outlets might go, maybe we don't want to give that person any amplification. So why Piers Morgan?
I actually don't think anyone would have said no to an interview with Armie Hammer.
Really?
No, absolutely not. Or the woman from Baby Reindeer, or Kevin Spacey. I think that I think that just because you interview someone doesn't mean you're endorsing them or doesn't mean that you don't get to ask them really hard questions. I think all of those 3 interviews are massive scoops and exclusives.
So why did they choose Piers Morgan?
Because, first of all, Piers Morgan now has become the sort of go-to place for pariahs where it sort of runs in full. There's not a lot of editorializing. Like, Piers Morgan doesn't give them a free ride. He challenges them, but it's an interview that runs really long, so they get a lot of opportunity to talk and things aren't just like chopped up into grabs like they would be in a 60 minutes.
Yeah.
So on a 60 minutes, you might give 2 2-hour interviews, but then they only use like 30 seconds of you saying the most explosive thing. So there's that. Then there's the fact that it is on the internet. It's on YouTube, Piers Morgan's shows. So it means that everybody all over the world can watch it for free straight away. So it's almost the interview equivalent of posting on social media. It's completely globally accessible. So it's the way to reach the most amount of people in the most effective short amount of time. And what's interesting about it is that it's also a conversational style. So the way the set's lit, the format of the interview, which is just chatting, there's no like overlay footage in the way that, say, a 60 Minutes would do. It feels very unthreatening. You look at it and straight away, you know, your shorthand, your thin slicing is, oh, he seems like a nice enough guy. Oh,
and then you remember, and then you remember some of the things that he is alleged to have done.
Yeah.
Does Piers Morgan also have the home for pariahs, perhaps because he is a pariah himself, just a little bit, from the mainstream media world? So he has a bit of a sympathy for that.
Absolutely. And he's definitely made a name for himself as being the anti-cancellation person.
Yeah.
And has resisted being cancelled himself. So this idea of what do you do if you're cancelled to that extent? Well, the only thing that you can do, we're starting to see now, is stare down the barrel of it and confront it.
And
after a period of time.
After a period of
But
time.
here's the thing. I want to push back on the idea that anyone would be happy to have Armie Hammer on their show. That's like, would anybody be happy to have P. Diddy on their show right now? Like, I think that giving a platform to somebody who has these serious charges, and I know they're not legal charges, although they could have turned out to be legal charges against them, Armie Hammer, giving them the platform and the mic to state their case.
But but hang on a second, Hol. What do you think journalism is? Is that what journalism is? Is interviewing someone giving them a platform, or is it holding them to account?
But I don't think in this case it is, because it is very much part of his comeback strategy, right? Like, let's do some softball. Let's do Piers Morgan. You're right. He does ask the hard questions, but it's not a woman. Because the thing that you forget about listening to him and listen to him then, he talks about how a lot of this was consensual. He talks about cheating on his wife, but that he was in a very bad place with his mental health and his addiction, which is all I'm sure is true. But then you pop over to X and you see the woman who accused him of rape reposting the details of the text messages and restating her claims that he raped her and talking about the trauma that she has and talking about the really much too disturbing and disgusting tweets to be either read out here or talked about by Piers Morgan on there. And you're reminded that this isn't a victimless situation, right? If we believe it to be true. And he has never denied it. He denies eating people. But to be fair, that's always been the media's beat up and fun thing to say that he's a cannibal. The much bigger piece here is that he's been accused of sexual assault and abusing numerous young women. I can't see it as just a, cute Hollywood comeback story. Because the reason people get so upset and defensive about it is for a very, very, very long time, men like Armie Hammer, who, let's be clear, the reason there's a documentary about his family at the moment on streaming is because he comes from a long line of very wealthy, very powerful people. And a lot of people in Hollywood had issues with him for a long time. They were saying they're trying to make him a star. They're trying to make us make him a star because he has all this serious backing. But there's something about him, right?
Jessie, I didn't watch the whole interview. What was his defense or his explanation or his point of view about all these things he's been accused of? Did he admit them? Did he deny them?
There were particular points where it just got very much into semantics. So there's one allegation And it's interesting what Piers Morgan doubles down on and what he doesn't, I suppose. But one was the branding question. Piers Morgan was like, I was quite surprised by that you would brand someone. And he said, it's like, lovers getting a tattoo. And the way that he tried to describe it was, I just used the tip of a knife and wrote A on her, and there wasn't even any blood and blah, blah, blah. And it was between two consensual adults and we decided on it.
So did he say that the whole thing was in the context of BDSM relationships?
Yes, and consent, essentially. And
drug use and alcoholism. He says he was in the throes of addiction.
And that some of those messages were sent when he was high. He has also told the story, and he's told this story before, about considering ending it all. And he got very emotional. He spoke about his children and the experience of, and you can't watch this and not feel something. When he's talking about visitation with his daughter, he wasn't allowed to be alone with her because of a sexual assault allegation, and she needed to go to the bathroom, and he wasn't allowed to take his own daughter to the bathroom. So he's positioned, and this is what's really...
I don't know if that's the worst thing in the world, but yeah.
Yeah, but you see a man crying because he knows he's let down his children, right? And that's what an interview of this...
See a man crying because he got caught.
But I think, and this is the thing, is that whatever Armie Hammer did, that doesn't take away the fact that he's a human being who's probably had a shitty few years, right?
And who's not been convicted of a crime.
And who's not been convicted of a crime. So this is where I get really stuck. I get stuck on this ethically and morally, and I can't quite resolve it, is I have started watching House of Hammer, and those allegations are horrifying and they fit the profile. And it's important to note as well, this isn't one woman, this is multiple women echoing each other's stories, saying he uses the same language.
So he's had a bad few years. They've had a bad few years,
right? Telling these stories that are really horrifying about some of the stuff he did to them. Obviously, they say that there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute him. But what do we want Armie Hammer to do when we hear the story about him considering ending his life? I mean, that's the cancel culture, which is imperfect, and, I'm not sure that's exactly what it is. But do we want people to die?
No.
We don't want people to die. Do we think that they have a right of reply? If these people can go on the record and talk about their messages, and I'm asking that. I genuinely don't know what the answer is. I don't know what the culture should do with Armie Hammer.
He's trying to come back, right? So what he's doing is he's testing the waters. And I read some analysis of this from the Hollywood PRs who said exactly this. They're saying he's trying to stage a soft comeback. So let's just test. Let's just see. I'll do a couple of podcasts. I'll do Piers Morgan. We'll see if there's a way back. Now, I agree with you, Jessie, that it's not that you want people who have sort of fallen from grace in this way, or whatever we want to call it, to disappear off the planet entirely. But they're also not owed our money to support their careers if they want to go back to being a movie star. I owe Armie Hammer nothing, and nor does anyone else. So well, remember a while ago when it was rumoured or clearly stated that he was working at a resort in the Bahamas, and everybody got a lot of laughs out of that. And they were all like, ha, 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 look at him now organising golf days. And we were all saying, well, the man's got to work. There are many other paths to redemption that do not involve Piers Morgan high-profile interviews, him getting back into Hollywood, him getting jobs. Because the thing is, the issue for people like Armie Hammer, whether we call this a sexual assault charge when there aren't actual legal charges or not, but so a very generous terms would be a sex scandal.
Yeah.
Right. For high-profile people who are part of a sex scandal, very distasteful, very violent seeming, adultery, addiction, whether or not that's going to ruin their career or not kind of depends who they were pretending to be in the first place. What's the gap between who they've been exposed to be and who we were supposed to believe they were? And it's interesting in Armie Hammer's case because although a lot of people in the industry say that they were trying to make him happen as a romantic leading man for a really long time, his big roles were never actually really that. Even in Death on the Nile, which he had a massive starring role in but came out after this, so they erased him from the trailer and the promo. But I've seen that movie and he's all the way through it.
Is he good?
He's great. But also in that, he also plays a sort of romantic hero, but with a dark edge. He's always got those guys because clearly that's sort of what people have always sensed about him. But him being so indignant about you don't understand that I'm just a nice family man who fell off the wagon for a little bit. And then you've got this cohort of young women who have no power at all saying, actually, this ruined my life. I'm still dealing with the trauma from it. They don't need to see him back on movie posters. And if I'm forced to choose a side there, I don't have any ambiguity about where my side is. My side is with those women rather than with him. I don't wish him ill. I don't wish him to go away, but just go and get a real job and stop popping up on every screen I look at planning your comeback.
I think the market will decide. And You're right, he's not owed anything by anyone. And if this is dipping his toe in the water, I mean, Hollywood is mercenary in that no one wants to take a risk if they think there will be a backlash at the box office or streaming or wherever it is. So if people don't believe that he can come back in a way that's commercially viable and that an audience will forgive or be able to overlook, then it won't work. Like, no matter how much he wants to come back, just because you want to come back doesn't mean you're allowed back.
Hammer said you could get the likes of me and Kevin Spacey very cheap right now because we can't get a job. And I was like, yeah, that's a worry. But that you're going to have this tier of cancelled men that are, regardless of what you think of what they did,
really good actors
that you could get
Woody Allen
for a really good discount price.
Are you going to get your money back? And that's the interesting thing. We've talked before on here about Louis C.K., for example, the comedian who, a sex scandal, again, using that very generous term, sort of ended his mainstream career, but he makes a very good living as a sort of professional cancelled comedian who he sells his own tickets through his own channels. He does all his own marketing, and that's working out really well for him. A bit harder for the movie stars because they need to be employed by somebody, and as Mia says,
by
the risk.
Studio.
And the thing is, it didn't used to be like that. Powerful men have been getting away with shit like this for generations and usually paid off, go away, we don't believe that anyway, and they'll get the backing. But the tables have turned, and I just don't have that many tears to shed for Armie Hammer.
Before we go, so many Out Louders have a lot to say about last week's group therapy episode. It was one of the juiciest ones we've had. It was. We had a very big argument about it, and it was a little bit. I'll give you a vibe. It was about a woman who is being woken up by her husband, pleasuring himself beside her in the middle of the night. And we discuss whether or not...
The pros and cons,
whether that's fair.
Whose team are we on?
Sort of sparked a lot of advice for Mia about how she can look at her phone in the night without her husband knowing. And to be clear, that wasn't nothing like sexual or sordid about that, but Mia was like, I sympathise because I want to look at my phone and I can't. And lots of outsiders were like, do this, do that.
You've got to be considerate when you're sharing a bed.
Here is a sneak peek of the episode.
What if she just went and sorted herself out in the middle of the night and he knocked on the door and went, hey, what are you doing? You've woken me up with the noise of that buzzing. What are you doing? I feel really offended.
But that's not what's happening. She's being woken up in the night with her husband.
But I don't think it's the
masturbating in their bed next door, which is the laziest.
It is lazy. Go into the bathroom, do it in the shower.
Laziest, most uncaring. Like, she's asked him not to do it. He continues to do it. That is the issue.
Did she ask him not to masturbate, or did she ask him not to wake her up and do it next to her? Like, if someone was doing it right next to you, I can see why that feels almost a bit intimate.
A link to that will be in the show notes. And Out Louders, we always want your dilemmas. So if you've got a spicy one, please email us at outloud@mamamia.com.au. We will have a link to that email in the show notes.
A very massive thank you to all of you Out Louders for coming and listening to our show today. Gosh, the news cycle has been a lot. And to our fabulous team for putting this show together. We'll be back in your ears tomorrow.
Bye. Shout out to any Mamamia subscribers listening. If you love the show and you want to support us, subscribing to Mamamia is the very best way to do so. There's a link in the episode description.